Usually when you look at the climax of like a massive historical conflict, a world war or a standoff between empires, it feels incredibly chaotic.
Oh, totally. The fog of war.
Right, the fog of war. If you read the accounts of the generals or the politicians in the room, there is this palpable sense of everything just hanging by a thread.
Yeah, you have armies clashing, leaders sweating in bunkers, intelligence failing left and right.
Exactly. It feels entirely unpredictable, like the outcome rests exclusively on human contingencies. You are constantly asking, who makes a mistake? Who blinks first? Does the weather hold up?
I mean, we assume the people in power, the ones with largest armies and the most capital, are the ones turning the gears of history.
Yeah.
And because human beings are fallible, those gears frequently jam. The narrative of human history is basically a narrative of improvisation.
And yet, when you step into the biblical narrative, specifically the ancient world of the Exodus, that fog just completely evaporates.
It really does. It's striking.
We are looking at a landscape that is the absolute opposite of chaotic. It's almost, chillingly precise. Welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are pulling back the curtain on one of the most dramatic, high-stakes showdowns in all of ancient history. We're zeroing in on just 3 verses today, Exodus chapter 11, verses 1 through 3.
Just 3 verses, but there's so much there.
Oh, it's packed. We are going to dive deeply into the historical, linguistic, and theological mechanics at play right before the final plague hits Egypt. So welcome to today's deep dive.
What is so compelling about this specific text, I think, is the sheer irony of the situation. It's a masterclass in ultimate authority versus perceived authority.
Right. Perceived authority is the key phrase there.
Exactly. I mean, we are looking at a moment where the most powerful human institution on the planet is raging against God's people. And yet, that human institution is entirely hummed in by a divine script.
That is the exact tension we need to explore for you all listening today. Pharaoh, who is, arguably the most powerful man on the planet at this time, thinks he has the absolute final word.
He really is.
He has just threatened Moses with execution. But as you dig into the text, the sources we're looking at show that Pharaoh is practically a pawn in this moment. God has already mapped out the exact outcome, down to the psychology of the Egyptian citizens and the transfer of their national wealth.
Yeah, this isn't just ancient history. It's a blueprint for understanding who really holds the power in the universe.
Right. It forces a terrifying but ultimately comforting question, When secular powers or massive institutions seem to have all the leverage, who is actually dictating the terms of the conflict?
And these 3 verses provide a definitive paradigm-shifting answer to that.
So before we zoom in on the specific grammar of these 3 verses, we really need to establish the reality on the ground. We are in the mid-15th century BC, roughly 1446 BC.
1446, yeah.
And to understand the weight of Exodus 11, you have to understand the sheer terrifying scale of the Egyptian empire at this time. We are talking about the 18th dynasty.
The New Kingdom period. I mean, this is when Egypt is at the absolute zenith of its power. They are the supreme superpower of the ancient Near East.
What total juggernaut.
Oh, a military, economic, and architectural juggernaut. They have expanded their borders deep into Nubia to the south and, all the way up to the Euphrates in the north. They're pulling in massive amounts of tribute.
And at the head of this empire is Pharaoh. Most conservative historical timelines place Amenhotep II on the throne during this exact period.
Right, Amenhotep II.
And if you read the historical records about him, he wasn't just a bureaucrat, he was a brute.
Yeah, he really was.
He was this incredibly arrogant, militaristic king who just constantly boasted about his physical strength. There are these ancient stone monument sittings where he claims he could shoot an arrow completely through a solid copper target while driving a chariot.
Which is absurd, but he built his entire royal identity on unstoppable might.
Right.
But crucial to the Egyptian mindset, he wasn't merely a king or a political leader. He was viewed as the physical incarnation of the god Horus.
Wow.
Yeah, he is the son of the sun god Ra. He is a living, breathing deity to them.
Which means his authority isn't just political, it's cosmic.
Precisely. To challenge Pharaoh is not just treason against a state. It is an assault on the cosmic order itself.
Like breaking the laws of physics.
Right. The Egyptians had a concept called Ma'at, which represents truth, balance, order, and justice. And the pharaoh's primary fundamental job was to maintain Ma'at.
Okay, so keeping the universe in balance.
Exactly. If chaos, which they called Isfet, entered the land, It meant Pharaoh was failing in his divine duty. So to
Ah.
defy Pharaoh is to threaten the very fabric of the universe as they understood it.
But by the time we get to Exodus 11, that fabric has been completely shredded. I mean, 9 plagues have already struck the empire.
Yeah, it's falling apart.
And it's vital to understand that these weren't just random ecological disasters. They were targeted, systematic assassinations of the Egyptian pantheon.
That's a great way to put it.
Like Hopi, the god of the Nile, who was supposed to bring life and fertility, was just totally humiliated when the water turned to blood. The Nile basically died.
Then you have Hecate, the frog goddess of birth and fertility, whose symbol became a rotting curse across the land.
Ugh.
And most devastatingly, Ra, the supreme sun god, the very deity Pharaoh is supposedly descended from, was completely blacked out by 3 days of thick, palpable darkness.
So the theological infrastructure of Egypt has been dismantled piece by piece.
Exactly.
And amidst this total collapse of Mata, you have the Hebrews. The Hebrew word used for them is, and correct my pronunciation here, atam.
Yes, Hashtam, which basically translates to state-owned slaves.
State-owned slaves. So they're not citizens. They aren't even really viewed as human by the Egyptian elite. They're just human machinery.
They are the economic engine of the empire. I mean, they have spent centuries baking bricks in the sun, building massive treasure cities like Pithom and Ramses.
And they have absolutely zero political leverage.
None. They have no weapons, no standing army, no economic capital, no foreign allies swooping in to save them.
Nothing.
Right? From a purely secular, sociological perspective, they are utterly powerless against the machine of the Egyptian state.
Which makes the literary structure of this text so brilliant, because if you read the end of Exodus chapter 10, it concludes with a massive, explosive confrontation.
Oh, it's so tense.
Pharaoh is furious after the plague of darkness. He looks at Moses and says, "Get away from me. Take care never to see my face again, for on the day you see my face, you shall die."
A literal death threat.
Right. And Moses, without missing a beat, calmly agrees. He says, "As you say, I will never see your face again."
It is a definitive, unyielding end to the negotiations. It's over.
But then you turn the page to Exodus 11, and down in verse 4, Moses is suddenly delivering one last devastating message to Pharaoh about the death of the firstborn.
Right, which seems like a contradiction.
Yeah. The immediate chronological question is, how is that happening? Did Moses leave the throne room, get a new message from God, and then just awkwardly walk back in right after saying he'd never see Pharaoh again?
Well, the Hebrew narrative structure here is incredibly sophisticated. Verses 1 through 3 of chapter 11, they actually operate as a divine flashback.
A flashback?
Yeah. The author is employing a standard Hebrew narrative technique to pause the chronological action of the confrontation.
So it's like a cinematic freeze frame. You have the protagonist and the tyrant face to face. The tyrant issues a death threat. And right before Moses delivers his final fatal counterpunch, the narrator hits pause.
Exactly.
The text pulls you out of the throne room and essentially hands you, the reader, the divine script, showing you a conversation that happened earlier between God and Moses.
It explains the underlying mechanics of why Moses has the absolute confidence to drop this final bomb.
That is so cool. It fundamentally reorients the reader's understanding of the event.
It really does. The narrator pauses the intense face-to-face standoff to show you the sovereign machinery that was already in motion long before Moses even walked into the room.
Right.
It proves that this final plague, the death of the firstborn, is not some improvised escalation by Moses because he got angry at Pharaoh's threat. It is the precise execution of a sovereign decree.
And a decree that goes back much further than just a few days. The sources we're looking at point out that we have to trace this all the way back to Genesis 15 to understand the covenantal bedrock of this moment. This is a 400-year-old promise.
You really cannot understand the Exodus without Genesis 15. God makes a formal binding covenant with Abraham.
That's the scene with the divided animals, right?
Yes, that incredible scene with the smoking fire pot and the flaming torch passing between the halved animals. God tells Abraham, basically, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years.
400 years?
But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions.
He lays out the exact blueprint 4 centuries in advance. The slavery, the judgment, and the wealth transfer.
Exactly. So when we read Exodus 11, We are not watching a deity reacting in desperation to human stubbornness. We're not watching God, like, adjust his plans because Pharaoh is being particularly difficult.
Like he's going to plan B.
Right. There is no plan B.
Yeah.
We are witnessing the exact, literal, historical execution of an eternal decree. God promised the affliction, he promised the judgment, and he promised the plunder. History is simply catching up to theology.
That context is just crucial. So we know the massive tension of the 18th dynasty, we know the complete lack of leverage the Hebrews have, and we know the eternal decree driving it all. So let's dive into the precise wording of Exodus 11, verse 1.
The syntax here is fascinating.
It opens with a very clear divine speech frame. The Lord said to Moses, "Yet one plague more I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt."
Notice the agency in that sentence. I will bring.
Okay, yeah.
The first-person verb places Yahweh as the sole, unmediated agent of the final judgment. Moses is entirely removed from the action here.
Because in some of the previous plagues, Moses stretched out his staff or Aaron struck the dust.
Exactly. But here, God says, I am doing this. Moses is relegated to a mere herald. God is personally wielding the sword.
And the specific word used for plague here changes the entire tone of the passage, according to our sources. The Hebrew word is nega.
Yes, niga. And this is a word with immense, terrifying theological weight. Well, out of the 78 times this word is used in the Old Testament, it rarely refers to a natural disaster, a storm, or a generic hardship. It predominantly refers to a deep-seated, infectious leprosy or a direct, lethal touch from the hand of God.
Oh, wow. So we are moving far beyond ecological manipulation. This isn't frogs swarming out of the river or hail destroying the flax crops.
Not at all. A nega is a targeted, defiling, highly personal strike. It implies an inescapable contact that penetrates the inner sanctum.
That is chilling.
God is not just disrupting their agriculture or their weather patterns. He is personally reaching into the homes of the Egyptian empire to strike a fatal, intimate blow. It is the lethal touch of divine justice.
Which explains the absolute finality of the second half of verse 1. Because God doesn't just say he will strike them, he guarantees the exact political and sociological result of that strike.
Right.
God says, after that, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you away completely. The Hebrew phrasing here is incredibly intense. It's, let's see, kala garouj yarouj.
The syntax here is a masterclass in Hebrew discourse emphasis. You have an infinitive absolute preceding a finite verb of the same root.
Okay, for those of us who haven't brushed up on our ancient Hebrew grammar recently, explain how that heightens the meaning. Because in English, he will surely drive you away sounds like a strong suggestion, but it doesn't quite capture the violence of the original language, does it?
No, English really struggles to translate this. In Hebrew, when you place the infinitive absolute before the finite verb, so garoj before yerojo, it intensifies the action to the absolute highest degree imaginable.
Oh, I see.
A famous example is in Genesis 2, when God tells Adam, in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Literally, that is dying, you shall die.
Oh, right.
It denotes absolute certainty and ultimate intensity. So in Exodus 11, this is not Pharaoh reluctantly signing a concession treaty. It means total, forceful, irresistible compulsion.
So Pharaoh isn't going to politely open the borders and let them wander out.
Not at all. He's going to urgently, violently hunt them down to expel them from his territory.
He's going to treat them like a lethal virus that he has to purge from his body immediately.
That is a very accurate analogy, actually. He won't be able to tolerate their presence for another second.
Yeah.
And the specific root word, garoj, is profound.
Yeah.
It's the exact same word used in Genesis chapter 3 when God violently drove Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. It implies an irreversible, permanent expulsion.
The irony there is just staggering. I mean, for chapters, Pharaoh has been the stubborn tyrant screaming, "I will not let you go."
Right.
And now, God's sovereign decree entirely swallows up Pharaoh's rebellion. The man who tried to prevent the Exodus is going to forcefully enforce it.
Yes.
He thinks he is the one issuing a banishment, but God is the one orchestrating a liberation.
God turns Pharaoh's stubbornness into the very instrument of Israel's deliverance. It's brilliant. But as we move into verse 2, this violent expulsion creates a massive logistical crisis.
Oh, for sure. If Pharaoh's going to wake up in the middle of the night and violently drive 2 million state-owned slaves out into a barren desert wilderness, how are they going to survive?
They have nothing.
Right. They have no supplies, no economy, no infrastructure. Which brings us to a command that has been a stumbling block for biblical critics for centuries.
A huge stumbling block.
God tells Moses in verse 2, Speak now in the hearing of the people, that they ask every man of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor for silver and gold jewelry.
This is a text that has generated intense theological and ethical debate over the years. Critics have long accused the Israelites of acting fraudulently.
Yeah, of basically tricking their neighbors into lending them jewelry with zero intention of ever returning it, or of outright divinely sanctioned theft.
Exactly.
It certainly sounds problematic if you map a modern Western suburban understanding onto it. Like, did God just command a nation to rob their neighbors blind?
To understand what is actually happening here, the sources emphasize that we have to meticulously examine both the Hebrew vocabulary and the legal context of the ancient Near East.
Okay, let's look at the vocabulary first.
The Hebrew word translated as ask is shal.
And shal doesn't mean to steal.
No, it simply means to ask, request, or demand. What is equally vital is the vocabulary the text deliberately avoids.
Oh, interesting.
Moses did not use the word ganab, which is the explicit legal term for stealing or theft. And he did not use the word loah, which is the precise legal term for borrowing with the intent to repay.
Okay, so they aren't running a scam. They aren't knocking on doors saying, hey, we have a 3-day religious festival in the desert. Can we borrow your gold necklaces and silver cups? We'll bring them back by Tuesday.
Exactly. They are making a permanent demand. And when you look at the ancient Near Eastern legal context, this action shifts from a petty theft to a highly structured legal mandate.
How so?
Well, in ancient vassal treaties and wage contracts, if you look at the laws of Hammurabi, for instance, there are explicit statutes dealing with indentured servitude and slavery.
Right.
If a worker or a slave was unlawfully detained past their agreed term or discharged without proper compensation, they had the legal right to demand to shoal severance and back pay from their master before they left.
Oh, wow. That completely reframes the narrative. This is a massive labor dispute being settled by the supreme judge of the universe.
Yeah, exactly. Israel had been ruthlessly exploited for generations. They were subjected to state-sponsored infanticide. They built the massive treasure cities that bolstered Egypt's GDP, and they provided centuries of grueling, unpaid labor.
Yeah.
What we are seeing in verse 2 is Israel legally demanding 400 years of unpaid wages. It is a formal, sovereign demand for restitution.
It is a cosmic lawsuit. God is executing a judgment against an empire that built its wealth on the blood of his covenant people. And this goes right back to the promise in Genesis 15.
Yes.
God told Abraham, they shall come out with great possessions. God is simply enforcing the contract.
The theological principle here is foundational to biblical justice. The oppressor does not get to keep the fruit of their oppression.
Wow.
God is righteous, and he enforces covenantal justice. He actively strips the wealth from the hands of the arrogant empire and bestows it upon his covenant children as restitution.
And you have to appreciate the economic devastation of this. You have a caste of state-owned slaves systematically stripping the wealthiest empire on earth of its most precious assets.
They are bankrupting Egypt.
They are neutralizing Egypt's economic dominance on their way out the door. And the text specifies they are asking for vessels of silver and gold. The Hebrew word our sources highlight is shali.
Right, shali. And shali refers to crafted items, articles, or vessels. These aren't just raw lumps of ore.
Oh, okay.
These were highly crafted, artistic items meant for pagan luxury, Egyptian status symbols, and idol worship.
So God is basically repossessing the aesthetic wealth of the empire. He takes the raw materials of pagan pride and redirects them for his own purposes.
Beautifully said.
But while the legal framework makes perfect sense, it raises a massive psychological problem when we get to verse 3. We know what Israel is demanding, and we know why it is legally and covenantally justified. But why on earth would the Egyptians actually agree to this?
That is the million-dollar question. If you leave the Egyptians to their own natural baseline psychology, they viewed Hebrew shepherds with total ingrained disgust.
Yeah, it was institutionalized racism.
Completely. Genesis 43 explicitly tells us that for an Egyptian to even eat a meal with a Hebrew was an abomination to them.
They view them as an unclean, subhuman slave caste. If an enslaved workforce suddenly walks up to the masters who despise them and demands all their silver and gold, the natural human response is not generosity.
No.
The natural response is violent reprisal. The Egyptians should have slaughtered them in the streets for even asking.
But look at the text in verse 3. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians.
There it is.
This is where we see God's absolute granular control over the human heart. God sovereignly rewires the Egyptian mind. The Hebrew word used here is un, which translates to grace, or unmerited favor.
And the text explicitly says God gave it to the people. He deposited it in the sight of the Egyptians.
The verb proves that God actively altered their inner faculties. This wasn't a sudden grassroots realization of human rights by the Egyptian middle class.
Right, they didn't just wake up and feel bad.
Exactly. It is a supernatural intervention. God orchestrates it so that the Egyptian populace is suddenly moved to view the Hebrews with profound generosity and awe.
Wow.
They recognize, even if just for a moment, the supreme authority of Yahweh over their own king, and they willingly, eagerly hand over their wealth.
It completely dismantles the idea that God only controls the macro-level events like weather or plagues. He controls the internal psychological dispositions of the people.
Yes.
He turns the hearts of the Egyptians like streams of water. And that supernatural favor that they're in extends specifically to Moses himself. The second half of verse 3 says, "Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people."
The Hebrew phrase is galo mensch, exceedingly great.
Exceedingly great.
To really grasp how incredible this is, we have to look at Moses' character arc. We have to remember who Moses was 40 years prior to this moment.
Right. 40 years ago, he was a fugitive. He was a murderer who buried an Egyptian in the sand and had to flee for his life into the Midianite desert.
He was completely rejected by his own people, too.
Yeah. When he tried to intervene in a dispute between two Hebrews, they sneered at him and said, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us?"
He was a complete outcast. He spent 4 decades tending sheep, which, as we just established, is an abomination to the Egyptians, in absolute obscurity.
And now, at 80 years old, he is standing in the royal court of the greatest superpower on earth.
With no army, no worldly title, no diplomatic immunity.
And yet he is viewed with absolute reverence by the elite advisors of Pharaoh and the common citizens alike. I picture it almost like a massive corporate espionage thriller.
Oh, how so?
Well, imagine a guy who uncovers horrific, systemic corruption at a global trillion-dollar megacorporation. He's chased out, smeared in the press, forced to live entirely off the grid in exile for decades.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Then one day, he walks right past security, straight into the executive boardroom. And instead of calling the police, the entire board of directors, all the vice presidents, and all the employees look at this exiled whistleblower with absolute trembling awe.
It's a profound reversal of status.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to recognize that this wasn't a PR stunt orchestrated by Moses.
No.
He didn't hire a marketing team. He didn't claw his way to the top through political maneuvering or charismatic speeches. I mean, he claimed he was slow of speech.
Right. He tried to get out of the job.
Exactly. This is God actively vindicating his mediator. True greatness.
Yeah.
Biblical greatness comes from being authenticated by God's word, not by worldly titles or self-promotion.
Moses is exceedingly great because the God he represents is exceedingly great, and God has proven it by fulfilling every single terrifying warning Moses delivered.
Notice the ultimate contrast here, too. Pharaoh, the man who built an empire demanding to be worshipped as a god, is isolated, terrified, and diminished in his own palace. His word means nothing now. Meanwhile, Moses, the humble servant who didn't even want the job, is exalted in the eyes of the enemy's court. It is the perfect illustration of God humbling the proud and exalting the lowly.
The mechanics of the Exodus are just incredible to witness. I mean, we've looked at the eternal decree, the violent expulsion, the legal restitution of the wealth, and the psychological rewiring of an entire empire.
It's a lot for 3 verses.
It really is. But now we need to pull the lens back even further because these intensive theological sources we're analyzing, they don't just view Exodus 11 as a fascinating piece of ancient Near Eastern history.
No, they view it as a prophetic blueprint.
Right. How does this history connect to the New Testament? Because you listening might be wondering, how does this apply to the gospel?
If you are going to understand biblical theology, you have to view Moses as a redemptive type. He is a historical foreshadowing of Jesus Christ.
Okay, lay that out for us.
Just as Moses stood as the mediator of the Old Covenant, representing God's elect before a hostile, enslaving world power, Jesus is the infinitely greater prophet and mediator.
So Moses stood before Pharaoh, but Jesus stood before Satan, sin, and the powers of darkness.
Exactly. Moses achieved a temporary earthly deliverance for one specific nation, bringing them out of physical slavery. Christ achieved an eternal cosmic deliverance for God's elect from every nation, bringing them out of spiritual death.
Wow.
Moses was exalted in the land of Egypt, but Christ, after his resurrection, was exalted to the right hand of the Majesty on high. given a name that is above every name, far above all rule and authority.
Let's trace that lethal stroke of judgment we talked about, the nugzos, from verse 1. How does that translate to the gospel? Because in Exodus 11, the judgment falls squarely on the oppressors. The Egyptians bear the wrath of God so that Israel can go free.
This is perhaps the most profound Christological connection we can make from this text.
Okay.
In Exodus 11, God announces one final, inescapable negalos, a stroke of divine justice that will secure the redemption of his people. It will fall upon the firstborn of Egypt. But in the New Testament, the ultimate deliverance of God's people requires a radically different kind of substitution.
Which brings us to the prophetic poetry of Isaiah.
Yes. If you look at Isaiah 53, the famous chapter detailing the suffering servant, verse 8 uses the exact same Hebrew root to describe the suffering of the Messiah.
Really? The exact same root?
The exact same one. It says, he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. The word translated as stricken, there is a verbal form of nega.
Oh, wow. So at the cross, the unmixed fury of divine judgment, the ultimate lethal touch of God's justice, didn't fall on us. We didn't suffer the plague.
No, it fell entirely upon the perfect substitute. Jesus Christ became the ultimate Passover lamb.
Yeah.
He bore the nega, the stroke of divine wrath, taking the penalty of the cosmic law upon himself, so that all who are sheltered under his blood are passed over by the judgment of God.
In Egypt, the judgment fell on the enemy to save the people. At the cross, the judgment fell on the Son of God to save his enemies.
It is structurally breathtaking.
Yeah.
The symmetry of the biblical narrative is just flawless.
It really is. And the parallels don't stop at the cross. What about the plundering of Egypt? Israel walked out of bondage carrying the vast wealth of the empire. How does that translate to the work of Christ?
It perfectly prefigures the cosmic victory of the ascension. When Christ died and rose again, he didn't just survive the wrath of God. He conquered the domain of darkness.
Okay.
The Apostle Paul uses this exact imagery in Colossians 2 and Ephesians 4. He says that Christ disarmed the rulers and authorities, putting them to open shame by triumphing over them. He plundered Satan's domain.
He led captivity captive, he bound the strong man and plundered his goods.
Precisely. Just as Israel plundered the gold and silver of Egypt to eventually build the physical tabernacle in the wilderness, the ascended Christ plunders the kingdom of darkness.
Oh, that's good.
He rescues elect sinners who are held captive to the pagan darkness of the world, and he transforms them into living stones. He uses the plundered wealth of the nations to build his ultimate eternal sanctuary, the church.
We are the plundered treasure of the true and greater Exodus. That completely changes how you view your entire salvation. You aren't just forgiven, you are claimed and repurposed for a holy structure.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, today? We've explored the history and the theology, but how do these commentaries instruct us to apply these truths to our lives right now?
The primary application is about where you place your trust in the midst of hostility. We have to remember the chronology. When Exodus 11 verse 1 was spoken by God, Israel was still enslaved.
Right.
Pharaoh was still sitting on his throne. The Egyptian military was still fully armed. From a purely visible empirical standpoint, absolutely nothing had changed yet. The whips were still cracking.
The reality of the promise had not materialized in their lived experience yet. They only had the word of God.
Right. And true faith means measuring reality by God's promises, not by your present circumstances.
That's a huge point.
You might look around today at cultural shifts, or hostile political climates, or intense personal suffering, and feel like the secular powers are firmly in control. It feels like Pharaoh is winning.
Yeah, it often does.
But God's decrees do not depend on visible circumstances. We are called to repent of worldly fear, to stop panicking at the news cycle, and to trust the absolute unshakable providence of God.
Now, I want to introduce a framing for our next point of application. The commentators we are digging into today draw some very sharp theological lines in the sand regarding how this text interacts with modern sociological and theological movements.
They do.
And just to be clear, we're simply reporting what the author argues here to help you understand their theological perspective, not endorsing a political viewpoint.
Right.
Whether you align with their conclusions or not, it's vital to understand the theological mechanics they are employing to make these claims. We are looking at this text through their analytical lens.
Right.
So what specific modern frameworks do these sources argue are dismantled by Exodus 11?
Well, the sources are quite robust in their theological polemics. First, they argue that this passage entirely refutes Arminianism.
Okay, the theological framework that suggests God's saving actions are ultimately dependent on human free will or cooperation.
Exactly. The commentators argue that God completely sovereignly controls human hearts in this text. He doesn't wait for Pharaoh's permission, and he certainly doesn't wait for the Egyptians to willingly generate a spirit of generosity.
He actively gives the O's the favor.
Yes, he dictates the outcome unilaterally.
He doesn't just offer deliverance, he secures it. Okay, what else do they tackle?
They also state that this passage is a direct refutation of the modern prosperity gospel.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, while it is true that God orchestrates a massive transfer of material wealth here, the authors argue that this wealth was strictly purposed for building God's kingdom, specifically the tabernacle, not for the Israelites to live their best life now in selfish luxury.
So it's a sharp critique of using God as a vending machine for personal, carnal enrichment. And they also press into some highly debated cultural issues regarding justice and economics, correct?
Yes. The authors explicitly claim this passage refutes secular social justice ideologies, specifically frameworks aligned with critical race theory.
Okay.
The argument presented is that Israel's wealth transfer was not an act of Marxist redistribution. It wasn't based on an inherent virtue of the oppressed class, or a secular desire to equalize outcomes through class warfare.
It was strictly covenantal.
Exactly. They argue it was an act of divine legal restitution directed by a holy God against a specific ungodly nation to fulfill a specific biblical prophecy made to Abraham.
Right.
The authors insist that true justice must be defined by God's moral law and covenantal promises, not by secular philosophies of power dynamics.
Again, understanding how these scholars apply the text helps us see the massive implications of biblical theology on modern thought. But bringing it back to a deeply personal level for you, the listener, these sources challenge us profoundly on the issue of our own material stewardship.
They really do.
We have to examine our reality. Are you in bondage to the worldly Egypt of consumer debt and materialism?
It's a deeply sobering question. We live in a culture defined by endless consumerism, a culture that constantly demands more indulgence.
Oh, 100%.
The text asks us to audit our lives. Are you utilizing the resources, the time, and the capital God has sovereignly placed in your hands to build his kingdom? Or are you hoarding the silver and gold of Egypt for your own selfish pleasure? We are called to consecrate our entire lives to the King.
Which brings us to the close of our time today. We have covered a massive expanse of theological ground. The scope of Exodus 11 verses 1 through 3 is truly staggering.
It really is.
In the space of 3 short verses, we see God decreeing final judgment, perfectly providing legal restitution for his people, literally rewriting human psychology, and publicly authenticating his servant.
It is a breathtaking, undeniable display of comprehensive divine sovereignty.
But before we sign off, we want to leave you with one final, lingering detail from the text to ponder on your own. It's a provocative thought that builds on everything we've discussed today regarding stewardship and the human heart.
It's a crucial point.
We've talked extensively about all that plundered Egyptian gold and how it was ultimately meant to build the tabernacle of God, as detailed later in Exodus 25.
It was meant for holy, consecrated worship.
Right. But if you know the rest of the Exodus narrative, you know the tragedy that follows. The Israelites would eventually take some of that exact same sovereignly provided Egyptian gold, melt it down in the fire, and use it to forge the golden calf in Exodus 32.
They took the very gifts God provided for their liberation and turned them into an act of profound, catastrophic idolatry.
Exactly. So here is your parting thought for today. God's grace can give you the treasures of Egypt, but only a transformed heart ensures you use them to build a sanctuary rather than an idol. Which one are you building with what you've been given today?
Because if we go back to our opening thought, the director hasn't just handed us the script to show us how the story ends. He's handed us the script so we know what role we are called to play right now in the midst of the empire.
We aren't lost in the fog of war. The decree is written, the victory is secure, and the director is in complete control. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive on Reformed thinking. Keep exploring the incredible depths of the text, and we'll see you next time.